Okay, dear friends, I bring you two suttas relating to this theme of about worldly desires, which I'm suggesting. It, it's said that these worldly desires can lead to conflict and war, and overcoming them, therefore, it would be an aspect of practicing for peace. But if worldly desires is just referring to the sense delight when we have a cool beverage or a sweet or something, some kind of delicious or beautiful experience, that doesn't really explain it um, as being a cause of war. I don't know anybody who signed up for the military and put on their body armor and picked up a deadly weapon and went running into a dangerous battlefield because they wanted ice cream. Uh, so I'm going to open the sutras and see if we can come to a wider understanding of what this uh, kama tanha is. Uh, Starting with the Majjhima Nikaya 14, the Greater Discourse on the Mass of Suffering. So I have heard at one time the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans near Kapilavatthu and the Banyan Tree Monastery. Then Mahanama, the Sakyan, went up to the Buddha, sat down to one side. This Mahanama is a lay disciple of the Buddha. It's said in this sutta that he is a noble disciple. Also, definitely he's obtained a stream entry. It's said in the commentary that he's attained the level of being a once returner. Uh, Mahanama is an interesting character. If you look up his name, he comes to the Buddha with these questions that are sort of reflecting a level of delusion. And the Buddha explains it to him, and then he says, "Oh, now I understand." Uh, uh, and then in the next sutta, he comes up with a similar question based on being deluded, and he gets things explained to him over and over again. So it's an interesting quality. He understands the sutta, but he doesn't seem to retain it very well. So Mahanama said to the Buddha, "For a long time, sir, I have understood your teaching like this. Greed, hate, and delusion are corruptions of the mind." Um, or you could say corruptions of the chitta. Uh, so it's the heart and intentional aspect of mentality that's being pointed to there. Despite understanding this, sometimes my mind is occupied by thoughts of greed, hate, and delusion. I wonder what qualities remain in me that I have such thoughts. The Buddha replies, Mahanama, there is a quality that remains in you that makes you have such thoughts. For if you had given up that quality, you would not still be living at home and enjoying sensual pleasures. This sentence seemed to be implying that if he had that quality, he would have given up the householder life and gone forth as a bhikkhu. But because you haven't given up that quality, you are still living at home and enjoying sensual pleasures. Now, sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress. They are all the more full of drawbacks. So, Mahanama, even though a noble disciple has clearly seen this with right wisdom, as long as they do not achieve the rapture and bliss, that would be the piti sukha. Sometimes it's translated as bliss and happiness. The piti sukha that are apart from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities, or something even more peaceful than that. They can return to sensual pleasures. So this is referring to the fine material meditations, the four jhanas, with the first jhana having the expression being secluded from sense pleasures, or being secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states of mind. One enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied thought and sustained thought. I'm going to pause here for a second. And go on a little detour about the relationship between tanha and the between tanha and meditation. That's not it. That's not it. The Sangiti Sutta is a very compressed, concise list of a list of lists that's reciting like the outline of the Dhamma, and it's helpful for the monks who are trying to memorize the various categories and the various teachings. It says in the Sangiti Sutta there are three cravings: the craving for sensual pleasure, to continue existence, and to end existence. That's called kama tanha, bhava tanha, and vibhava tanha. This is the one that we hear the most. It's the most famous when the Buddha explains craving, when he gives the standard explanation of the Four Noble Truths. The cessation craving is defined in this way as sensual craving, the craving for existence, and a craving to end existence. But then here in the Sangiti Sutta, it says there are another three cravings. Kama tanha, which is sensuality; rupa tanha, which is form tanha; and I should say fine material form, and arupa tanha, formless craving. What this is referring to is the mode of thinking or the mode of existence, which is also associated with different realms in the Buddhist cosmology. So when a person practices based on sensual desire, if that's their state of mind, if they have the desire to be reborn in the world of sensual desire, then they could be reborn as a human or an animal on this plane of existence. So we have been born in the kama loka, the sense desire world. All the sentient beings in this plane of existence are naturally have the tendency or the inclination towards sensual craving. The rupa tanha is, I think, connected with rupa loka, which would be a world or a cosmos or a space that's associated with the fine material bliss and happiness associated with the four jhanas. And then the arupa tanha would be associated with the arupa loka, the immaterial world, which is associated with immaterial meditation. In another place, this is the Itivutaka. It gives a sequence of the way the practice progresses that follows this sequence of escaping from kama, then escaping from rupa, then escaping from arupa. It says in Itivutaka 72, renunciation is the escape from sensual pleasures. Formlessness is the escape from form. Cessation is the escape from whatever is created, conditioned, and dependently originated. That is to say, cessation is nibbana element. I'm going to share this with you so you can just get the link and just understand these words very clearly. This is 8072. Renunciation is the escape from sensual pleasures. Formlessness is the escape from form. Cessation is the escape from whatever is created, conditioned, or dependently originated. When I saw this particular sutta teaching, it especially made me appreciate that Richard has regularly pointed out how the formalist meditation practices have a very particular place and a connection for those who are practicing to awaken. And this seems to show it in terms of that sequence and in terms of those three kinds of craving. Returning to the first sutta that we were looking at about the shorter sutta on the great mass of suffering. The Buddha is giving a contrast between being overtaken, obsessed with sensual desires and finding seclusion from sensual desires in connection to jhana meditation. I don't know whether you want me to get into this or not. I see, Ionica, I'm going to put you in the share screen so that I can get your smiling face in the spotlight. There's a little tempest in a teapot that happened a few years ago. I don't know whether it's still ongoing or not. It's among the discussion forums where people discuss about the suttas. Ajahn Brahm once said something about that seclusion in the first jhana as being a seclusion from the objects of sensual desire. Because it's a plural, sensual desires are the objects of sensual desire. And therefore, when a person thinks Ajahn Brahm says that the cause of dukkha is not desire, but the objects of sensual desire are causing dukkha. And then people can be in shock and horror. How can somebody dare to criticize Ajahn Brahm? He's so accessible. If you don't understand what he's saying, you should just ask him. Don't get on a forum and give out criticisms. And then the person writes back and says, well, you could compare it to the serial sex criminal who was criticized for many decades before he was finally caught and put in jail. So, excuse me for making fun of the internet, but but the sensual desire is the kind of desire that attaches itself to these sensual objects. And then there's a different kind of desire that could attach itself to the bliss of jhana. Or there's a different kind of sensual desire that could attach itself to a desire to be reborn in a particular kind of a world, like the fine material world or the immaterial world. And so that's all I have to say for now about that. I better stop for a moment and find out whether I've thoroughly confused you or whether there's any comment or question about what we've said so far. And Anagarika Mitakantes.
Sort of as the resident Ajahn Brahm fan, I just want to say that the argument is actually that the sensual desire is already included in the seclusion from unskillful states. And therefore we should not think that sensual desire is being mentioned twice in the formula, because that doesn't make so much sense. And therefore we should read that as kama being in the plural. That's the argument anyway. So just wanted to mention that.
Among the unwholesome states, there are other states besides sensual desire which are unwholesome, such as hatred and delusion would be two of them. Or else the asava of bhava, bhavasava, or the ditthasava, clinging to views, or the avijjasava, clinging to ignorance. And if you look at a different list, you could also say that besides sensual desire, there are four other hindrances. So I don't know that I understand the argument, but I don't think that Ajahn Brahm is saying that the tanha, which should be given up in the second noble truth, is referring to the objects of desire that should be given up, but rather the variety of desires should be given up. Yeah. Any other comments about this? See, there's at least one person who's savvy enough to be aware of the tempest and the internet that I was speaking about. Okay, Richard.
Thank you. I just want to make a point that this piti sukham that's being mentioned in the sutta, that's
Yes.
exactly what it says when he rejects austerity and thinks, no, jhana is the way. Why should I fear that piti sukham? He uses that exact same word, because it has nothing to do with the physical senses, sensual activity. It's on a different plane. So that's how he makes that decision that, this is the way to go. Anyway, I know
Yes.
I've mentioned that before, but I just saw that uses of that term. So I looked up the Pali, and yeah, it's the same word that he's using. Anyways,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Bringing back the spotlights. I'm going to return back to reading in a moment. The theme relating our this craving with war and peace is going to come out momentarily. Okay, now returning to Majjhima 14. I think rapture and bliss apart from sensual pleasures is what's definitely in the jhana. And then when it says something even more peaceful than that, one might think that the immaterial meditation is more peaceful, or one could especially think that nibbana is more peaceful than jhana. So even though a noble disciple has clearly seen this with right wisdom, as long as they do not achieve the rapture and bliss that are apart from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities, or something even more peaceful than that, they can return to sensual pleasures. But when they do not achieve that rapture and bliss or something more peaceful than that, they do not return to sensual pleasures. Now, The Buddha said,
I think we lost Aya Sobina.
Yes, I see
Mhm.
that.
She'll probably come right back.
Yeah.
I had a question. While we go through this, my mind tends to understand it, but then I start forgetting again what is defined as sensual pleasures. Like I know a cup of coffee can be, but I start losing again like sensual pleasures, and I'm always when I hear sensual, I'm always thinking sexual. But I know that there's more to that. And then I start forgetting maybe, it's the simple of things. Um, I'm assuming, correct? Like putting a warm jacket on when it's cold outside. That's a sensual pleasure, correct? Or could that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's anything that gives some sense delight, some pleasant feeling, It can be something we hear or something we see. It can be something we think, even some touch, physical sensation, taste, and what's the other one? Smell. So, any kind of sense input that, and fundamentally what's happening is if it's something that we deem as pleasant, it's because we have some pleasant sensation that arises as a result of that contact. I see a sight and the eye is open, there's contact between my eye and the visual object, and some pleasant sensation arises, and that would give this feeling. And what very quickly arises as a result of pleasant sensation is desire.
go
And
ahead,
that's
please.
peace, Hello, Aya.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make another effort to come back to the sutta. These are now the drawback. I'm going to coming to the danger of a sensual desire. First, we start with the gratification. Let me see. Before my awakening, when I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, I too clearly saw the right wisdom that sensual pleasure gives little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. But so long as I didn't achieve the rapture and bliss that are apart from sensual pleasure and unskillful qualities, or something more peaceful than that, I didn't announce that I would not return to sensual pleasures. But when I did achieve that rapture and bliss, or something more peaceful than that, I announced that I would not return to sensual pleasures. What is the gratification of sensual pleasures? I think this is what Aya Brahmavara must have been speaking of. There are these 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. What known? Sights, known by the eye, which are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds known by the ear, smells known by the nose, tastes known by the tongue, touches known by the body, which are likable, agreeable, desirable, pleasant, sensual, arising. These are 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. This is the gratification of sensual pleasure. Now, what is the drawback of sensual pleasure? It's when a gentleman earns a living by such means as arithmetic, accounting, calculating, farming, trade, raising cattle, archery, government service, or one of their professions. But they must face cold and heat, being hurt by the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, and reptiles, and risking death from hunger and thirst. This is the drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in the pleasant life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. That gentleman might try hard, strive, and make an effort, but fail to earn any money. If this happens, they sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breasts, falling into confusion, saying, "Oh, my hard work is wasted, my efforts are fruitless." This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures apparent in the present life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. I'll just go a little further, then I'll call in Richard. That gentleman might try hard, strive, make an effort, and succeed in earning money, but they experience pain and sadness when they try to protect it, thinking, how can I prevent my wealth from being taken by rulers or bandits, consumed by fire, swept away by the flood, or taken by unloved heirs? And even though they protect it and ward it, rulers or bandits take it, fire consumes it, or the flood sweeps it away, or unloved heirs take it. They sorrow, wail, and lament, beating their breasts, falling into confusion, saying, what once was mine is gone. This too is the drawback of sensual pleasures in the present life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. I'll call on Richard.
Thank you. I just had an insight into the sutta. What Buddha is talking about here is that there's a tipping point. Like we can all read this, okay? Sensual pleasures cause so much unhappiness and this and that, as opposed to the Piti Sukha and states higher than that in the jhana. But the Piti Sukha and the jhana don't have these drawbacks. So when one's mind hits this tipping point where they realize, oh, if I go in this direction, I'm not going to experience all these bad things anymore. Those things are going to stop, they're going to fall away, and only these positive things without any of those drawbacks are going to be the manifestation. And that's why there may be people here listening right now who have been to meditation retreats and have attained jhana, etc. Unfortunately for us, the monastics can't tell us whether or not they do this, although Ajahn Brahm kind of tricks with that a little bit, saying, well, I have a friend that tells me. But anyway, but normally, this isn't discussed among non-monastics, although non-monastics, what I mean is with monastics with non-monastics. Non-monastics could discuss it among themselves, and they may have attained these jhanas and everything, but their mind, either because they haven't attained being a noble disciple, or even if they have attained that, they may not have reached, because these are levels of development, that tipping point where they see very clearly, oh, wait a minute now, if I go here, that stuff is over with. And that makes the difference between, initially between a once returner and a sotapanna. anyways, it's just my personal feeling. Anyone's free to disagree, but I don't know. Suddenly, it just as I was reading it and listening to it, it just struck me in that way. Thank you very much for listening.
You're welcome, Richard. I would like to propose that in a certain way, this sutta is like a reverse engineering about what is the first noble truth. So, are the first and second noble truth. So in the second noble truth, in the first noble truth, what is dukkha? Well, all of these things that he's describing are dukkha, the dukkha of this world. And then in this case, in each case, each one is being pointed to. This is the drawback of sensual pleasures. And so then, in a way, that is a statement of the second noble truth. So the common factor among all of these diverse, different forms of suffering is that all of them are arising based on this kama tanha, which is an aspect of the second noble truth, and which is something to be given up. So even one who is a stream winner or a once returner might still have chores to do. If they're a householder, they still might have wealth or financial wealth and money. They still can lose everything. All of their material possessions can be lost because of floods and theft and different kinds of disasters. But what's the difference in that kind of person versus an ordinary person? They're not wailing and because they have practiced developing a renunciation. They have practiced developing contentment. So whatever comes to them is what comes to them. It's okay. And if it doesn't come, it's okay. So for the householder, in terms of their wealth and their money, or for a monastic, in terms of whether or not they get food or whether or not they get a robe, that's okay too. So because of practicing contentment and practicing renunciation. Um,
Question actually.
okay.
So just a small thing that popped out was that in this sutta, according to the commentary, Mahanama is at least a stream winner, but a once returner. But when the Buddha is answering his question, he is prefacing it with before my enlightenment, when I was still an unenlightened bodhisattva, I basically thought the same thing as you, Mahanama. That's what he's saying. So presumably the Buddha wasn't a once returner before his awakening. Doesn't that track best with like being maybe on the path to stream entry? Because that could, I guess that sticks out as sort of a little bit of difficult to reconcile with the idea that he's a once returner. But whatever.
I think I'll leave that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I could. Well, I had listened to something from another bhikkhu who had reviewed this sutta and also the same question about the commentary. And that bhikkhu's response landed for me better. He says the commentary doesn't seem appropriate above this because at the once returner stage, these qualities would have been ameliorated to some extent, so you would have more sense of seeing them going down, but could be a sotapanna. Could be a sotapanna because he may have right view. Which is why he is basically saying, "Hey, I see this. This is true, and yet look at my behaviors. What's going on here?" And I think it has a lot to speak about our conditionality, how conditioned we are. And of course, as creatures who are in the sense world, we are conditioned with this going after sense pleasures. And until we have the benefits of the pleasures that are beyond these sensory ones, that are the quieting of the mind and eventually nirvana, of course, we have the conditioning that still attaches to a sense object in a pleasuring kind of attached way, where we have the tanha. So that bhikkhu was saying, Yes, could definitely be a Sotapanna, but unlikely to be a once returner. But we don't know.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Karina. I'd bring up your picture, but I'm afraid to try to do anything with my computer right now because my computer is so flaky.
This is even better. Um, I'm a little confused, and I think I'm not understanding well. Especially with the question, we know what are sense pleasures, and it just basically seems like, pleasantness for the senses. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what giving that up means, like how one does that, because the reason I'm confused is like, but I still have a human body with nerves. And take away even, cultural conditioning, just the sense of pain versus not pain, the sense of safety or not. So is it so it's giving up the attachment to pleasure? Is that even possible when you have a human body? I'm not sure if you're understanding my what I'm trying to say. Like it's not like the sense of pleasure doesn't exist, can't or can go away, or rather pain can disappear. Let me know if I need to clarify more. Thank you.
I'm going to answer by opening up a different sutta very briefly. This is a very short sutta, and I think this sort of answers it. This is Sensual Pleasures in the Sutta Nipata. If a mortal desires sensual pleasure and their desire succeeds, they got what they wanted, they definitely become elated having got what they want. But for that person, in the throes of pleasure aroused by desire, if those pleasures fade, it hurts like an arrow's strike. So this is one who is swept up in pleasure, getting what they want. One who, being mindful, avoids sensual pleasures like sidestepping a snake's head, transcends attachment to the world. There are many objects of sensual desire: fields, lands and gold, cattle and horses, slaves and servants, women and relatives. When a man lusts over these, the word for lust is anukijjati, the weak overpower him and adversities crush him. Suffering follows him like water in a leaky boat. That's why a person ever mindful should avoid sensual pleasures, give them up, and cross the flood as the bailed out boat reaches the far shore. So this sutta is definitely saying, even when having the ice cream or when seeing beautiful scenery or feeling the lovely warmth of the warm sun on a cool day, or the lovely coolness of a fresh breeze on a warm day, or any of the other delightful, likable, pleasing sensory contacts that are available in the world, that one would not become overpowered with elation. And that furthermore, there's a kind of craving which is trying to secure safety by, for example, accumulating enough wealth so that you think that you can have a comfortable life, maybe enough saved up for your retirement, maybe enough, if you could save up enough so that at the end of your life you could get into a really good nursing home for your last palliative care before you die, and then you will have achieved the goal of avoiding unnecessary amount of pain, if that were your goal. But what the Buddha is saying is there's not any safety in any of that. So you can't take it as your refuge. Ananaya.
Well, I was kind of thinking along the lines of what Karina brought up, but the thing is, it's like, yes, renunciation and getting to the level of a Buddha and moving into or realizing Nibbana ultimately, but there's a whole lot of steps in between. So what are some of the ways, if not first acknowledging that allowing one's senses to go wild and have no control and just indulge all over the place is not what we're most of us are doing or inclined to do perhaps at this point in our practice. But there are two things I remember. One is from Ajahn Chah, and he was advising as far as when one is giving up things, how to deal with the sense pleasures. And he said, when you first see something, so you have the contact, do not act on it. Then wait and go on, and then go back and you can eat whatever that was that you were going to eat. But you're not reinforcing the cycle, in my mouth, kind of a thing. And Ajahn Sumedho years ago was on a trip in Switzerland in the Alps. And I think it might have been the first time he had been there. But anyway, so it's an absolutely fantastic view. And so he just was, enjoying the scenery. And then he caught the moment that when he turned away or had to leave, that he wanted more of it. So it's this continuing process of catching yourself, like there's nothing wrong with looking at a view in the Swiss Alps, but wanting more of that view or a continuous view is a problem because now you've moved into craving and clinging. So anyway, those are some of the things I've remembered over time and try to incorporate or have, use in my own life in dealing with regular, ordinary life and not becoming overly attached or just able to just put things aside and not have that response.
I think I'd like to return to the sutta and leave enough time at the end to have some discussion about this practical way of how to be in the world and have our sensory experiences without being overtaken by desire, not being overtaken by sensual craving. So here is the sutta. So they've already gone to the grief over losing what they had. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasures, kings fight with kings, aristocrats fight with aristocrats, Brahmins fight with Brahmins, householders fight with householders, a mother fights with her child, a child with mother, father with child, child with father, brother fights with brother, brother with sister, sister with brother, friend fights with friend. In this case, the statement about servants and slaves, wives and relatives being the object of sense desire is what really has given me a much broader view that we want a social connection. Everybody needs to have a good friend. Even a monastic must have a kalyanamitta. There's no awakening without that kind of a good friend. But then there is another kind of seeking for security and refuge through either one's power over people who are lower, like the slave and the servant, or maybe one's power over the woman, and as well as being safely in a connection, an interconnection with the social group. But we must realize that this is not a safe refuge, and that it's not a safe refuge, not a secure refuge, and that if you make your own happiness a hostage to those social connections, then you will have a lot of anxiety, a lot of existential anxiety, a lot of anxiety even about one's identity. If you are identifying with your social position, and then you feel that your identity can be erased. And this is what we see in the news all the time. We heard that, like in one state, they've canceled Black History, because that to have the clarity about that identity is supposed to be disappeared, or else I think, and I've heard that it's said that Ukraine is not really a country, and that they're not really a peoples who deserve to have their national identity. And so on and so on. So there's so many ways that, like, people are trying to erase each other, and this is digging. It's poking at their craving for a secure social position. But as monastics, even though we have good friends, we don't seek to make that into our social security plan, because we've seen beyond it. And even I think the strongest example is between a parent and a child, because the child really is depending on the parent for their life, and the parent is really giving the child the gift of being able to develop normally through that attachment. So even in the midst of the natural attachment of a parent and a child, to also understand it's impermanent. This is not my child. And that the child is going to become otherwise. That they're no longer, in the future, they won't be attached to me in that way anymore. And that there will be a separation, change and separation. And so we constantly talk to ourselves that way. And if we are able to have a different base of bliss and happiness, so we don't think that our bliss and happiness comes from our child, or from our husband, from our wife, and from our family, from our social position, then we can really have a secure happiness. Otherwise, our happiness is always going to be insecure and plagued with anxiety. So once they started quarreling, arguing, and disputing, they attack each other with fists, stones, rods, and swords, resulting in death or deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasure, apparent in the present life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. See, he's bringing it all back to sensual pleasures. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasure, they don their sword and shield, fasten their bow and arrows, and plunge into a battle massed on both sides with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing. They are struck with arrows and spears so their heads are chopped off, resulting in death and deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in the present life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. See, you would never do that for the sake of ice cream. But if your relative were threatened, many ordinary people, if their relative was threatened, they would be willing to take up arms and to put themselves at risk of life to protect their relative. This is another drawback of sensual pleasures apparent in the present life, the mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. Further, for the sake of sensual pleasure, they break into houses, plunder wealth, steal from isolated buildings, commit highway robbery, commit adultery. The rulers would arrest them and subject them to various punishments: whipping, caning, clubbing, cutting off hands, feet, both, cutting off ears and nose, or both, the porridge pot, the shell shave, the rahu's mouth, the garlands of fire, the burning hand, the bulrush twist, the bark dress, the antelope, the meat hook, the coins, the caustic pickle, the twisting bar, the straw mat, being splashed with hot oil, being fed to the dogs, being impaled alive, and being beheaded. You may look up the specific details of these forms of torture that were known about in the Buddha's time. These result in death and deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasure. And then even further, for the sake of sensual pleasures, they can conduct themselves badly. When their body breaks up after death, they're reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. This is a drawback of sensual pleasure, to do with lives to come, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. So, does anybody agree or disagree that sensual pleasures lead to suffering? This is
Yeah, I also wanted to go back to how you mentioned the sensual pleasure of sort of like community affiliation, I guess, can cause a lot of stress around identity. I remember when I was practicing metta, I was like, oh, if I have compassion for this group of people, at least one person in my community might be like, really? You sure you want to love that person? And then I noticed I was like afraid to do it because I felt like it threatened one of my senses of identity. And that I had to be like, I had to like let go of that in some capacity in order to actually practice the compassion. But felt better once I did that.
identity has become so important in modern times, and seeing the danger with these different forms of social identity does not mean that anybody thinks that it's skillful or right to be insulting or trying to erase or insult another based on some distinction about identity. That's definitely not what's said in the sutta. Those things are evil, unskillful patterns, and partly we hope that, with the practice of skillful, nonviolent speech, that we may cause a culture shift and bring a better world that doesn't support those kinds of harmful behaviors, and as well that internally, if one can find a space that's sort of beyond those identities, that it would be possible to not be harmed, not to be essentially harmed, no matter what anybody says or does against you. Yeah, we may come around to that again afterwards. I want to go through this sutta. Now the Buddha is talking about he's come to the future life, the harmful effect of unskillful deeds leading to being reborn in a woeful state, and now he's coming to a different type of confusion of the ascetics, the followers of Nigantha, who are concerned about how to emerge from the painful effects of previous bad deeds. The Buddha says, Mahanama, this one time I was staying near Rajagaha on the Vulture's Peak Mountain. Now at that time several Jain ascetics on the slopes of Isigli at the Black Rock were constantly standing, refusing seats. They felt painful, sharp, severe, acute feelings due to overexertion. Then in the late afternoon I came out of retreat and went to the Black Rock to visit those Jain ascetics. I said, Reverence, why are you standing refusing seats so you suffer painful feelings? And they said, the Jain ascetic, this is Bhante Sujato is applying the modern terminology of the Jain ascetic to the disciples of Nigantha Nataputta. The Jain ascetic of the Nyatika clan claims to be all-knowing, all-seeing, to know and see everything without exception. Thus, knowledge and vision are constantly and continually present in me while walking, standing, sleeping, waking. And the Buddha is challenging them. He said, Oh, Jain ascetics, you have done bad deeds in past life. Wear them away with these severe and grueling austerities. When in the present you are restrained in body, speech, and mind, you're not doing any bad deeds for the future. So due to the eliminating of past deeds by fervent mortification and not doing any new deeds, there's nothing to come up in the future. With no future consequence, deeds end. With the ending of deeds, suffering ends. With the ending of suffering, feeling ends. With the ending of feeling, all suffering will have been worn away. Indeed, this is one of the versions of the views that were held at the time about the karmic retribution and how a person can avoid or overcome the consequences of previous past deeds that are landing on this self, which is transmigrating from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, carrying along with it a certain amount of, they call it like dirt, connected with the defilement resulting from bad deeds. This is not the only theory. There are several different theories, but all based on the concept that there was this self transmigrating, carrying along these results that needed to be taken care of. The Buddha said, Reverence, do you know for sure that you existed in the past? And it is not the case that you did not exist. We don't, Reverend. But Reverence, do you know for sure that you did bad deeds in the past? We don't, Reverend. But Reverence, do you know that you did such and such bad deeds? We don't, Reverend. But Reverence, do you know that so much suffering has already been worn away, or that so much suffering still remains to be worn away, or that when so much suffering is worn away, all suffering will have been worn away? We don't, Reverend. But Reverends, do you know about giving up unskillful qualities in the present life and embracing skillful qualities? No, we don't, Reverend. So it seems that you don't know any of these things. That being so, when those in the world who are so violent and bloody-handed and of cruel livelihood are reborn among humans, they go forth as Jain ascetics. You should remember that the Buddha did have the direct experiential knowledge of his previous lives and of the way that beings pass away and are born, uh, uh, manifesting the transfer of karma, but without a permanent self existing in any part of it. Now, this is the rebuttal. Gautama, pleasure is not gained through pleasure. Pleasure is gained through pain. For if pleasure were to be gained through pleasure, King Sanya Bimbasara of Magadha would gain pleasure, since he lives in greater pleasure than Venerable Gautama. Clearly, the Venerables have spoken rashly without reflection. Rather, I'm the one who should be asked about who lives in greater pleasure, King Bimbasara or Venerable Gautama. They replied, clearly we spoke rashly and without reflection. But let that be. Now we ask Venerable Gautama, who lives in greater pleasure, King Bimbisara or Venerable Gautama? And the Buddha said, well then, Reverence, I'll ask you about this in return. You can answer as you like. What do you think? Is Bimbisara capable of experiencing perfect happiness for 7 days and nights without moving his body or speaking? No, he is not. What do you think? Is he capable of experiencing perfect happiness for 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day? No, he's not. But the Buddha makes this statement about himself. I am capable of experiencing perfect happiness for 1 day and night without moving my body or speaking. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. So this is referring to a 7-day meditation. What do you think, this being so? Who lives in greater pleasure, King Bimbisara or I? This being so, Venerable Gautama lives in greater pleasure than King Bimbisara. That's what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Mahanama the Sakyan approved of what the Buddha said. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Aya. This goes back in a way to my previous comment about Piti Sukha being connected at the same time Buddha, because here he's talking to these Jain ascetics and he's telling really his own experience, because Buddha says, all the asceticism I did almost right to the point of death. He said, I got no higher distinction or any other kind of accomplishment whatsoever. In other words, he got nothing out of it. And also when he was doing that, he didn't know anything. Yeah, did I do something in my past lives that I need to do all this suffering now? Or how do I know this suffering is going to lead to something in the future, right? So he's really just relating to them, again, in the sutta, the same exact type of mental experience that he experienced when he saw through these things. And he's also warding off the possibility that Mahanama may not understand clearly that the way to enlightenment is by getting away from the body, by leaving the body, setting it aside and all its desires, by using this jhana technique, which is the technique that he professes the most, okay, to elevate one's chitta, one's state of mind, adi-chitta, to go to the higher states of mind, and that path will lead one on, with the correct understanding. And not only will it lead one on, but if one wants to, one will be able to see all their past lives and see what deeds they did if they want to do that, right? And one will also understand what causes one to take birth in a certain way. So these questions actually can become answered through the Buddha's teaching of these particular practices and developments. And someone was asking some questions about they were having difficulty with the idea of giving up sensual pleasures. There's a sutta, unfortunately, I can't remember it exactly, but someone comes and says that of the Buddha, that the Buddha is like destroying the idea of pleasure or something. And the Buddha said, no. He says, I look for the highest pleasure. And if I remember correctly, he goes through these different levels, finally culminating in Nibbana. And he says, Nibbana, that's the highest. I'm looking for the high. I'm not saying don't look for pleasure. I'm looking for the highest pleasure, Nibbana. So anyways, that's the comment I wanted to make. Thank you very much for listening.
Karina.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing up this topic. It's really interesting and helpful. And I think I understand it a little better, hopefully. I have right understanding. A line that really got me was just that simple, fields, lands, golds, cattle, horses, and then the social, servants, wives, etc. And I was thinking more, like putting a jacket on when I'm cold. And I realized putting a jacket on when I'm cold is not letting myself go towards self-mortification a little bit, So it's not that, because I think one way you can misunderstand his instructions is, oh, I'm supposed to not have sense pleasures. But it feels it's more about the relationship, the orientation to sense pleasures. And what you said, Ayasoba, and I'm really taking that away, that it's not what I'm pursuing for safety and a refuge. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm not rejecting it, and because that would lead towards self-mortification. So it is respecting the body, but it's not where I put my energy. And in fact, knowing that the non-material is way, way more happiness than any material sense pleasure. So that's kind of what I'm taking away from it. Just really focusing in my daily life on a different orientation to sense pleasures, not negative or positive. Thank you.
You're welcome. My starting point with this topic was understanding how sensual desires lead to conflict and war. There's another aspect of it. If you think of the three kinds of tanha, the craving for central desire, the craving for existence, or the craving for the end of existence, the craving, some of them are getting more like into the realm of views. Like if you have got a view about the self and thinking when my body dies, my self is going to be destroyed, or thinking, identifying the self with any one of the five aggregates, and then the craving to take care of the five aggregates. So the craving to have nice perceptions and a nice feeling, and to have the body be pleasant, and wanting all of the five aggregates and all of them together to be like really perfect, is sort of like feeding in a kind of a synergy with the view that this bundle of five aggregates is me, is myself, what I identify with. So then the Sakaya Ditti, which is one of the fetters that we hope to break if we would like to have stream entry, is in a kind of an interaction with the gut reactions, the visceral reactions that are happening with our emotions in terms of the sense desire. My friend she wasn't a Buddhist, she was following a Vedanta school of Hinduism, and she thought that she'd overcome desire. Then she was in the hospital having some surgery with a breathing tube. And while she was lying there on the bed, the tube got clogged up with mucus and she couldn't breathe. And the nurses were there in the room, but she was not able to speak or move her body or do anything to get their attention because of being under anesthesia or something. And she was like desperately, desperately, desperately wanting help because she was going to die because she couldn't breathe. And she said that, just then she didn't know how much she wanted to live. And that's like the ultimate sensual craving that then sort of feeds over into all of these concepts and views that we have about existence. Even people who crave a rebirth in a heavenly realm. It could be because they're afraid of dying, or that they have this deep visceral, not even a mental, it's just a visceral desire for life, more life. That's supposed to be a characteristic of the Western god Yahweh, as the god of, it's associated with more life, protecting life. So there is some kind of a connection between the proliferation of views and gets fed into coming from sensual craving, and the proliferation of views, especially the proliferation of false views, is essential underpinning of going to war. You can't go to war without perpetuating a whole lot of falsehoods. So that's my thought about that.
I just want also a small comment about the sutta. Maybe this is obvious, but um, is it possible we could look at the sutta as also like an expansion of the middle way, basically? Because the first part is about the sensual pleasures and the dangers, and then he goes to speak about the people who are doing self-mortification, both sort of the wrong paths, and it ends with basically the Samma Samadhi, which he sort of explains as being able to sit here in still and experiencing bliss for even days. So yeah.
Right. So Samma Samadhi is the middle way between addiction to pleasure or pursuing mortification. Karina.
Yeah, thank you. Anagara Kamita Kanti, yeah, I can see that. And I just wanted to share, and I think what I'm going to take away from today's meeting is something you said earlier, that I'm going to try to practice. Whatever, this focus on contentment and renunciation, and that whatever comes to me, can it be okay? Can it be okay? Whatever comes to me, can it be okay? And especially, I think when one is sick, it's a really good practice.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to invite if Venerable Nyanaka or Abramavara have got a final word about how to be able to let go of sensual craving.
I could follow up a little on what Karina just said. So recently I had a steroid shot in my back to, alleviate pain in the body. And it was a wonderful and interesting experiment and experience, because although there was the reduction of the particular pains that the steroid was counteracting, it introduced a bunch of side effects, and it turns out I'm allergic to. So I had running through my body a lot of the sensations of anxiety, as well as the flushing and the swelling and all of those things. And it was very curious because I have a history years ago of anxieties, and that had with it all of the mental anguish of anxiety. And here I was experiencing a tremendous physical sensation of anxiety, but I was happy.
You didn't have
I
the
had
views.
I didn't have the views, and I had the mental qualities of joy, of happiness, the somanasa. So sukha somanasa, even though the body was dukkha, there was no domanassa with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a way to experiment, is see when you're stepping away from the bonding to an experience that's a dukkha experience and creating the unpleasantness, or bonding to the experience of pleasant, and see where the somanasa exists from the practice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Aya Brahmavara, do you have a final comment?
Thanks, Aya. Yeah, one thing I'm taking away from this sutta, is how desire and aversion are so intertwined, so, and just to remember that, so indulging in sense desires, one is also increasing the desire and also increasing the aversion. So when you lose the things you like, the things you're enjoying, the things you're immersed in that give you pleasure, when those things are taken away, that really shows us how much we're attached to desire, because then we feel that much hatred and aversion, and aggression can come up, and the wish to get back or to fight for, and just taking that on board, just accepting, realizing that there is that danger also with indulging in sense desire, is that one can become quite hateful when the circumstances, the causes and conditions arise, and you're deprived of the things that you're so attached to. And it's very salutary, this sutta. I think it's a fantastic sutta. I'm really grateful for you bringing it in, because, for us to help us to understand how it is that people can do the most appalling things to each other. And it's all coming basically because of thwarted desire.
Yeah.
And there is a quote that I love from a Christian, actually St. Augustine, who said famously, "There's nothing that a human being does or will do or has done that is not an act of love." And I've contemplated this a lot. And it's really the same topic. It's, there's nothing we won't do. There's nothing that we do that's not driven by desire of some sort. So I get goosebumps with this sutta, and I just feel it's very powerful, and it's worth reading again and again. And it gives me a lot of compassion for people who are harming themselves and others as well,
Let us close by giving respect to the Triple Gem. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thank you, everyone, for your patient listening today.
Thank you so much, Aya.
Thank you, Aya.